Hi everyone, I hope you have already seen the first episode of The Hills, where I talk about the hill forts of the late Bronze and early Iron Age in Austrian and Slovenian Styria. If you have not, please make sure to watch it first. In this shorter video, I want to take a look at one interesting protohistoric hill fort site that lay quite close to the route we followed in the larger episode, but did not make it into the final cut. So let's visit it now. This is Ljubična Gora, which is located near villages of Zbelovo and Zbelovska Gora. This rather prominent hill, whose summit rises to 533 meters above sea level, lies only several kilometers from the gateway between Homec and Vrhek that I mentioned in episode 1. And if we move downstream from that gateway following the course of the Dravinja river, we arrive right beneath Ljubična Gora, rising above the river's right bank. At the same time, the western end of this hill reaches a narrow little valley formed by a small stream flowing into the Dravinja. This winding valley running between lower hills seemed to have served as natural communication corridor for a very long time. In 1846 the railway line from Graz to Celje was laid through it, and in its modernized form that railway still runs there today. Following this route, even a traveler on foot could reach Rifnik, another hero of episode 1, within half a day, so this landscape is already somewhat familiar to us. The first hints of a prehistoric settlement on Ljubična Gora appeared as early as 1854. At that year, a Styrian historical periodical briefly mentioned the discovery of a stone axe and a Celtic silver coin associated with this hill. Yet for more than a century afterwards nothing else seems to have been found there, perhaps simply because no targeted research was carried out. It was only in 1970s that the possibility of the existence of a settlement on Ljubična Gora began to attract the attention of a local researcher, Dr. Slavka Ciglenečki. He personally surveyed the hilltop, carefully examining the remains of its ancient ramparts, and was able to identify the first fragments of both prehistoric and late antique pottery. Archaeological excavations carried out in 1985 by the staff of the Celje Regional Museum brought more evidence to light, fragments of protohistoric, late antique and early medieval pottery. In addition, the researchers were able to define more clearly the remains of late Roman defensive wall. At the same time, a large number of metal artifacts, above all Celtic coins from the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, were discovered here by amateur finders using metal detectors. Fortunately, most of these objects did not disappear into private collections, but were honestly handed over to museums in Celje and Ljubljana. These finds convinced scholars that the hill was also occupied in the late Late period. There was, however, a more unfortunate chapter in this story as well. In 1990, during a major flood, the basement rooms of the Celje Regional Museum, where valuable artifacts from Ljubična Gora were stored, were damaged by water. As a result, the paper bags containing those finds were destroyed, and with them the written records that still preserved the excavation data for individual objects recovered on the hill. Even so, if we bring together all the archaeological material discovered here for years, compare it with visible remains on the ground, and check it against LIDAR data, a broader picture begins to emerge. The hill fort appears to have originated already in the end of the Bronze Age. Fragments of metal objects typical of the Ornfield culture, which can be dated to the 11th and 10th centuries BC, point to settlement here at exactly that time. And in broad terms, this corresponds quite well with the emergence of Rifnik in roughly the same period. The nature of these finds has even led some scholars to suggest that Ljubična Gora may already have been one of the most important central sites in the region. This substantial hill fort then continued into the early Iron Age. Most likely it was during that period its fortifications were completed in their fullest form, making the settlement at its greatest historical extent, and right now we are literally flying above them. The next clear phase of activity on the hill belongs to the late Late period, when the Celtic tribes living in these lands were minting their own silver coinage. How large the settlement was at that time is difficult to say. That question clearly requires further research. For the period of the Roman Empire, the evidence is also too limited to tell us much with certainty. But what we can see clearly is that in late antiquity, when the migration period began to reshape this part of Europe, a hillfort once again existed here, with its own separate line of fortifications. By then, however, it was much smaller than the settlements that had existed at the very end of the Bronze Age and in the Hallstatt period. On this map you can now see its approximate boundaries. It's probably difficult to speak of continuous occupation here from the 11th century BC all the way to the 6th century AD, as some earlier researchers once imagined. More likely, the hillfort went through several cycles of growth, decline and reoccupation over those 1500 years. But one point is worth stressing again: its greatest extent belongs to the first centuries of the Iron Age. At that time, the fortified area stretched to about 420 meters in length and up to 110 meters in width. And beyond the remains of the southern rampart, traces of additional earthworks still can be seen, features that remain insufficiently studied even today. To this period we should probably assign several finds typical of the Hallstatt world discovered on this hill. Horse gear of the Cimmerian Thracian type, well known in both Styria and Dolenska, as well as an iron axe and a bronze cauldron. The finds from the late Latin period and from the time of the Roman Empire consist largely of coins, first Celtic, then Roman, and there are quite a lot of them. Together with the late Latin pottery and the silver fibulae of that time, they clearly suggest that the hillfort experienced a new peak of activity during the last couple of centuries before these lands were conquered by Rome. And the old fortifications, perhaps still surviving from the Hallstatt period, no doubt became highly valuable again by the late 4th century, when various tribal groups began moving through these lands out of Pannonia, searching for a safer, richer, and in many ways warmer life inside the weakening empire. This was the time when the climate was becoming harsher and the pressure from the east was increasing, above all from the Huns and from those who chose to move with them. In those years, the hillfort may well have served as a kind of refuge, a fortified place where people from the surrounding settlements gathered only temporarily, retreating behind its walls while the danger of armed raiding groups was still close. And finally, this hillfort most likely did not appear on Ljubična Gora by chance, nor was it by chance that in the days of the Habsburg Austrian Empire the railway was laid precisely here. The landscape itself suggests that one of the most convenient routes from the Pannonian plains towards the Savinia Valley must have passed beneath this hill. Of course, we cannot say with certainty that the engineers who planned this railway in the middle 19th century were consciously following some ancient Bronze Age or Iron Age route. But they most likely identified one of those very logical natural passages, one of the easiest ways through the lower part of the Karavanke system opening out of the Dravinja Valley. And that passage lays right here, beneath Ljubična Gora. Thank you for watching, and special thanks to Dr. Slavka Ciglenečki, whose highly informative article helped me to prepare this text. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and leave a comment. If you haven't subscribed yet to my channel, please do. There are so many other hills with an impressive history ahead. See you!